Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and it was our hope that Minister Shatter would be here, but I'm quite sure our motion will be taken to his desk, and obviously dealt with yourself, Minister. That's very much appreciated. I won't dwell too long on the issue itself. I know you know very well what the issue is in terms of forced labour, and I know very much that you understand the industries involved when we're talking about forced labour. What we're talking about is an attempt to criminalise it. And the need to criminalise forced labour is urgent, and the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland, and some of their people are here today in the gallery, have recorded 169 cases of forced labour over the last 6 years, but we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Without a law against forced labour, victims will not be identified, and unscrupulous employers will continue to engage in this behaviour. Asking a victim of forced labour, as has been suggested already, to pursue their rights through the existing legislation, be it through health and safety legislation or employment legislation, is deeply problematic. The experience of victims to date is that they do not receive protection or justice despite these so-called protections being in place already. My understanding is that not one person has been prosecuted for any of the offences in forced labour cases. This reinforces the requirement for a standalone offence of forced labour. We are aware that Minister Shatter is due to make a decision shortly regarding, and I quote, any legislative and administrative measures required to address deficiencies in the law in this area. We need clarification in this regard. We need to bring Ireland in line with our legal commitments that we have undertaken at EU and international level. Okay, and I know the Minister understands what those commitments are, and we are urgently asking that the Minister will outline his plans and the government's plans to criminalise forced labour in Ireland and to protect those most vulnerable of workers in this republic.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks,
Deputy Dowds.
Cathaoirleach, thank you. It's a matter of shame that I stand to discuss this issue today, because this issue should not be discussed, should not have to be discussed in any civilised democratic country. I understood that the issue of slave labour was something consigned to the history books, but it is a sad indictment that we are still dealing with this issue. I recently got involved in this issue because of the case of forced labour at an Indian takeaway called Aodhan beside Newlands Cross in Clondalkin. It involved a man called Mohammed Yunus, who I'm very glad to say is in the gallery. And I want to welcome him to the Aodhan and also the people from the Migrant Rights Centre of Ireland. And he is a classic example of forced labour. He was lucky enough to escape from his conditions. He was forced to endure by his employer. He was brought to Ireland on a work permit, but rather than renewing that work permit, the employer kept Mr. Yunus, who was very little English, working through threats and intimidation. And this kind of thing must stop. Eventually the Rights Commission Service heard his case, which led to a Labour Court ruling in September 2011 that Mr. Yunus is owed €90,000. Papadam's restaurant has yet to pay him that money. He's now unemployed, living in a hostel, and cannot see his family. He's robbed of everything.
20 seconds.
And yet Papadam's keeps trading. And this perfectly illustrates why action needs to be taken. My understanding is that not one person has been prosecuted in relation to any case of forced labour, and for that reason I'm calling on the Minister to see that forced labour is properly criminalised in Ireland. The courts have the power to close down companies which employ forced labour, that courts have the power to jail people for significant periods of time who use forced labour. Just on my last point, that an inspection system is introduced which roots out those who might be using forced labour. Thank you.
Minister Lynch, you have 4 minutes.
I'd like to thank both deputies for raising the issue. It's indeed, as both deputies have rightly said, it's a very serious issue, and I'm taking this debate on behalf of the Minister for Justice, Equality and Defence, Deputy Alan Shatter. There are a number of measures in place to prevent exploitation and forced labour in Ireland. The International Labour Organisation's definition of forced labour comprises two basic elements. The work or service is exacted under the menace of a penalty, and it is undertaken involuntary. Forced labour cannot be equated simply with low wages or poor working conditions. In addition to the range of employment law enacted to protect workers from exploitation generally, the Criminal Law Human Trafficking Act 2008, which came into effect on the 7th of June 2008, criminalises the trafficking of persons for the purpose of labour exploitation, including forced labour. The term traffics is broadly defined in the Act. For instance, an offence may be committed under the Act by providing a person with accommodation or employment in order to exploit that person for forced labour if coercion or deception is used. An offence does not require cross-border movement or illegal entry into the state. The Human Trafficking Investigation and Coordination Unit of An Garda Síochána works closely with labour inspectors attached to the National Employment Rights Authority in relation to cases where there are allegations of labour exploitation. Since the 7th of June 2008, a number of cases of alleged human trafficking for labour exploitation has been investigated by An Garda Síochána. 19 cases in 2009, 19 cases in 2011 and 12 cases that should be, I'm assuming, 19 cases in 2011 and it says 12 cases this year. To date, no proceedings for the offence of human trafficking for labour exploitation has been commenced in this jurisdiction. 3 investigation files have been submitted to the law officers. Direction for no prosecution has been received in 2 of these cases. Additional information has been sought and provided in respect of the 3rd investigation file. An Garda Síochána also works closely with other police forces. For example, an intense investigation was conducted in Ireland and evidence was transferred to Romania, where 3 Romanian men were sentenced to imprisonment for 7 and 5 years respectively in December 2009 for the trafficking of Romanian nationals into Ireland for labour exploitation on farms in Wexford. There are a wide range of training and awareness-raising activities ongoing with personnel in the public and private sector likely to encounter victims of human trafficking for labour exploitation. In addition, since 2010, the Department has sanctioned over 25,000 in funding to the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland to assist them in their work in assisting migrants who may be victims of trafficking for labour exploitation or forced labour. The Criminal Law Human Trafficking Act 2008 is primarily an anti-trafficking measure and was never intended to address all the exploitative phenomena outside the context of human trafficking. In some cases, these have been referred to in Garda Síochána as human trafficking for labour exploitation. Prospective evidence on other offences, including immigration offences, employment permits offences, false imprisonment and assault, have been uncovered. These matters remain under investigation. An analysis of allegations of forced labour coming to the attention of An Garda Síochána since the Criminal Law Human Trafficking Act 2008 came into effect is currently being examined by the Department so that any legislative or indeed administrative measures required to address deficiencies, if any, in the protections against forced labour can be identified. In the event that a need for additional legislative measures is established, proposals will be brought to Government in the usual manner and as quickly as possible.
Deputies, and can I remind the Deputies that you shouldn't mention anybody outside the House in your address?
Minister Shatter, seeing as he's not here, but I know that that the Minister will take our comments back to his office. I mean, what I get from the answer is a positive in that the Minister is not saying that no legislative change is needed. He said that a legislative change may be needed and in due course that may happen. But as you can appreciate, I know you understand this, Minister, that you know, what we effectively are talking, as Deputy Dowds has said, is effective slavery in this Republic currently, today. And while the legislative process has to take its due course, that gives little satisfaction to those who are effectively suffering. So while we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about 2012, and we're talking about a republic, I think what we need to do is to ensure that any investigations as to the necessity for legislation take place immediately, and that legislation which we know is necessary happens as soon as possible. And a dateline for that, Minister, would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Dowds.
First of all, I know I mentioned a name, but I did have that person's permission, and the matter has been in the public arena before this, so I'm not mentioning something that hasn't been in the
You're losing your time there.
in the public arena. What I want to be sure of at the end of this process is that if legislation is required, it will be enacted, because this has been an ongoing problem for a number of years. I suppose the big case that came up was the Gamma case in 2005, where a lot of workers were involved. Now, I don't think that kind of case happened, but it particularly disturbs me that despite that, organisations like that can continue to get contracts in Ireland, and it is wrong that people who are employing people in those situations are allowed to function. They shouldn't be allowed to function.
Thank you,
and I would urge that there be movement on this. Thank you.
Minister, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Just say that the Migrant Rights Centre and other organisations like that, I suppose, are not just the first port of call for people who find themselves in difficulties, but usually are the only port of call. I mean, it's amazing that we have 4 state statutory agencies in the country, 4 different units that are charged with responsibility in relation to this area, and they're wide-ranging: the Legal Aid Board, the Garda Síochána, the Department of Health and the Department of Justice. So I think there is a huge issue in relation to information and communications around all of this. And I do think that in the event that someone is granted a work permit, because that's usually how these people come into the country, that there must be in their own language, because as the deputies have rightly said, these people have probably very limited English, much better I'm sure than our grasp of their native language. But most definitely we must ensure that the information that is necessary to keep these people safe in very vulnerable positions is in fact distributed to them. In relation to the legislation, because the governing act may need to be tweaked. It may not be the sort of overriding or overarching legislation that we assume is necessary. Maybe it can be done by alterations to existing legislation, but most definitely people that exploit people in this way, there has to be a penalty.